there's a lot of implications of how this technology can change. What's the next technology beyond quantum computing? Well, if we could really control the transfer between matter and energy, then effectively we can transport matter or create matter from other matter. It's like, oh, give me a martini, there's a, ice cream sundae. If we had that technology, what would that change? I mean, no grocery store, no cow, there's a lot to think about.
This podcast episode is an event recording. If you're listening to the audio version, you might be missing some context from the speaker's visuals. You can find the video version at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. There might also be audience questions or other background chatter that's not audible. Look, event recordings are never perfect, but we're sharing it here because we think you're going to find something valuable in it. Let's talk a little bit about our sponsors first, and then we'll get on to the show. This episode is sponsored by ATL BitLab. ATL BitLab is Atlanta's Freedom Tech hackerspace. We have co-working desks, conference rooms, event space, maker tools, and tons of coffee. There is a very active community here in the lab. Every Wednesday night is Bitcoin night here in Atlanta. We also have meetups for cybersecurity, artificial intelligence, decentralized identity, product design, and more. We offer day passes and nomad passes for people who need to use the lab only occasionally, as well as memberships for people who plan to use the lab more regularly, such as myself. One of the best things about having a BitLab membership isn't the amenities, it's the people. Surrounding yourself with a community helps you learn faster and helps you build better. Your creativity becomes amplified when you work in this space. That's what I think, at least. If you're interested in becoming a member or supporting the space, please visit us at atlbitlab.com. That's atlbitlab.com. All right, on to our show.
So you probably have seen me before around. We're covering Jeff Booth's Price of Tomorrow, chapters 3 and 4. The book is quite short. I don't know. I was going to guess, what, about 150? No, 213 or so pages. You can get on audio. It's like running time's about 5.5 hours. I had listened to it about 2 years ago and put it on when I was doing some yard work the other day just to kind of refresh myself, and I was like, oh, it's over. So it's not that big a deal. So let's get into it. And so who am I? Andrew, if anyone hasn't met me before. Been around doing development in various incarnations, from mobile all the way up to enterprise stuff. If you want to know about all that, just tap on me later. And lately I've been doing more Bitcoin Lightning, trying to get into the community, trying to flex a little bit in that realm and try to contribute a bit. Sound money got me closer to this sort of realm, so my roots go in that direction a little bit. And decentralized stuff, money, media, naming, and ID. If you're interested in naming an ID, decentralized stuff, you can find me later as well. So let's get into it. All right. So as I mentioned, just 2 chapters. Going to be easy. They're pretty short chapters, so I added a little bit of fluff. I felt I could. So let's just go ahead and take a look. So in chapter 3, he talks about why is it so hard to think differently? And I think it's a really interesting topic. In fact, I kind of begged Ida to let me do this part. But he talks about how really hard it is to change your mode of thought and your model of what you're thinking about. And he mentions the of course, example of Galileo. I mean, before that point, everybody thought that all that stuff, all up in the sky, the moon, the sun, even those funky things that didn't move like we thought they should, were just out there rotating around us, and that we were the center of everything. And Galileo really stepped up and said, "Hey, I think we're one of the spinning things," and that caused a lot of consternation in his time, right? And you can imagine. Well, it would be hard to imagine what really thinking about the world prior to that really meant. But we know from history that he had a real hard time with the church about that, and you know, that was definitely a tough thing. Witches, he mentions witches that at the turn of I guess around the 1400, 1500 time frame, even in the new colonies, a lot of suspicion around what witches were and how you found them and stuff were and discerned what was very controversial, but yet most folks had a model of thinking about this. They trusted the authorities, and history has shown that they really were misguided in so many ways in that way. He also then mentions a good bit of that chapter is talking about the 19th Amendment and women's right to vote. It's like we think about how normal, everybody should have an equal right to vote, but it's really a recent thing. Until the complete adoption of the 19th Amendment, women couldn't vote, didn't have the same say in government, and even though they were really lobbying for it for quite a long time in the lead up to the 19th Amendment being ratified, it just wasn't part of the makeup of who decided what was going to go on in the government. So those are pretty significant shifts. The next part is about weak foundations, and what does he mean by this? So he makes a case about how our brains work, going back a little bit to physiology. I'm sure everybody's heard the story about, thinking about back to Neanderthal man, and what do you do if you see that or hear some rustling in the bushes? It's like, do you run away? Do you investigate? It's like, is that just the wind in the brush in the reeds, or is that a tiger back there? So as humans, we have to absorb so much information from our environment all the time. Just if you think about what you go through and experience, all the things you're smelling, all the things you're hearing, all the things you're seeing as you go through life, it's a lot. So we've developed these mechanisms to filter out this information, this deluge of information. And those take the form of biases, really. So, if you have an instinct to run away from that rustling sound in the bush, it's because, you're part of the gene pool that survived and wasn't eaten by a tiger, whereas the other folks that decided, I wonder what's going on in that bush over there, and then got eaten by a tiger, they didn't live long enough to propagate their gene pool, right? So we have this natural filtering mechanism that our brains go through. Oh, and one thing I didn't do at the beginning, I wanted to offer an invitation. If anybody has a question as I'm talking, just throw your hand up and we'll stop and chat. I don't need to hold everything until the end of the talk, although I have a little Q&A at the end. If you want to just jump in, please do. There's a microphone over there by Chad, so if you want to jump in, just let me know. All right. We got a few more folks trickling in, which is great. We just got started, so you haven't missed much. So anyway, as you mentioned, there's a lot of sort of filtering and bias judging. And a lot of this comes in the form of basically these biases. Now, if you ever go on Wikipedia and look at all the psychological biases, you'd be amazed. There's like lists and lists of biases, different biases. And you might think, that's crazy. I'm sure some of these are just bullshit. But you read each one and yeah, I can kind of see why that is. And I just mentioned a few of them here. So anchoring, once something's established, you don't question it anymore, right? That's anchoring bias. Recency bias, it's always been like this. It's always going to be like this. This is how the world works. This is how this works. First there's a bull run, then there's a consolidation chop, and then there's an explosion with the bull. It's like, yeah, but that's recency bias, right? That's or looking at a pattern and saying, okay, this pattern repeats. Confirmation bias is a big one. It's just our natural ability to say, with new information that comes in that counters what we already believe, it's like, that doesn't really fit. Or something that reinforces what we already believe, you're like, oh yeah, of course, that's exactly, see, that proves my point. But it's like when taken just independently, those pieces of information may have equal weighting, but you already have dismissed one and used the other one to bolster your case. Another one, if you're in development or paying for anything, sunk cost bias, right? It's like, how often are we trapped by this one? It's like, oh man, I already paid for that license, so I guess I'll use that software. Or I already bought the upgrade for my pickup truck, so I guess I'll get something else. Once you've kind of expended time and energy and resources, you don't want to change direction to where all the decision making that brought you there and got you to spend money on stuff and time and energy gets discounted or thrown away. Nobody wants to throw away their energy. He also talks about, as an example, kind of talking about why it's so hard to think differently about this situation of Eastman Kodak. Most people probably don't know, but they were started in 1888, so they've been around a long time. And they shut their doors in 2012, which is not that long ago. And they really pioneered. They had the first commercial camera available in 1888. That's what it looked like. And then this guy came along. He was, I don't have his name handy, but he was the guy that invented the digital camera, employee of Eastman Kodak. So here it is that he's got his right hand on this blue thing, and that whole stack of stuff is the digital camera. I think the one on his other hand is like another version of it when they started, getting it brought down to size a little bit. But this was revolutionary. I mean, think of all the industry that was changing. Does everybody remember those little stands that you drive up to and drop your rolls of film on? Those little photo-like booths? Like there was like a person there. And then you go back like a week later and then they'd like rummage through a bunch of envelopes and give you one. And you'd like open it up and you'd say, oh, that was a bad picture. That's a bad picture. 20 bad pictures and 2 good pictures. Because that was how long the feedback loop was. And just think about how taking a photo now, I mean, I take photos of, how wires are plugged in so that when I'm disassembling something, I'll remember how to put them back, So it's like, we don't even think about it. I'll take pictures of, just inane things just as a reference, just to like remember that I saw something. Not that I even care about the picture, it's just like a little point in time for me. So this guy, they could have owned it. They could have had the traditional the film industry. They could have had the whole future electronic film and digital photography industry. But they blew it. They just didn't see that the digital was the way it was going to go, and they didn't adapt. And I grabbed, this is a picture of some recent Samsung phone. On the back, it's got like 5 camera lenses. It's like, you've got this thing that's that thin. It's like, and you've got 5 different aperture in focal length camera lenses running on the back. It's like, just that alone is a pretty big, significant, change in how we think about photography. And you can argue, a film camera can give you so much better picture, and it does in a lot of ways, but the convenience and the immediacy is like far outweighs that in so many cases. I threw this in here. This book by Clayton Christensen, if you're familiar with it, The Innovator's Dilemma, kind of fits in both chapters. I threw it here, and there's an honorable mention in the other chapter. But if you ever are interested, this author goes and talks about why it is that established corporations have such a hard time innovating. And to give you the short of it is the new innovations almost always cannibalize the existing company's revenue streams in some form. And once a new innovation starts appearing and looks like it's going to challenge the status quo that the company's built up and that revenue stream, then there's like antibodies that get released in the company and just kills it. So it's very difficult. This is why startups can run circles around established companies when it comes to innovating. It's a really interesting book. I recommend it, but that's not what we're talking about. Two-speed thinking. So I thought I had some more. Hang on a second. Here we go. These are all the subsections. I'm not clicking fast enough. A second. All right. I'm going to get back to these other topics here in a second. Another, when I was reading this chapter, it really, another book that I had read in college really popped into my mind, and I brought it along. Has anyone seen this book before?
Excellent.
Yes. No one else? So it's by a guy named Thomas Kuhn. I think it was published originally in 61, maybe 65, something like that. It's pretty early. Let's see, 62. And I read this in college philosophy class, and I really liked it. I still have the sticker from the engineer's bookstore used at $5.95. And this book really goes through the Galileo use case, goes through a bunch of other similar use cases of how technology and specific scientific technology really is hard to change, why it's so hard to change thinking about what's going on, whether it's in biology, and he goes through a bunch of different examples. But the short of this book is really before a new paradigm of thinking takes over, the folks that embody the old one have to die. And it's kind of a brutal truth, but that's really, yes, there's always people that bridge between the old schools of thought and create new ground for the new school of thoughts and have to deal with a little bit of both sides of things. But for things really to take hold in a broader sense in society, the existing folks have to die. And I thought that was pretty harsh, but true. When I bought this book, I was doing a little calculator of inflation. So according to CPI, this is a Bureau of Labor Statistics, at $5.95, it's now around $16.34. But if you go and look at the Shadow Stats Index, which is a guy who does these in 1980 methodology index of pricing, according to him and his data, this book would be worth $106 right now, which I think is a little crazy, but anyway, thought that would be kind of fun. If you go looking for this book today on Amazon, you won't see it with this cover. You'll see it with this other cover. They've updated it a little bit, but same book. Alrighty. Another fellow really restated the same thing. Max Planck said in 1950, so 1950, the new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. So kind of restating the same premise. The next section about the technology booms. Well, before I go on, questions. Go ahead.
I was just going to comment. Maybe we should consider outlawing life extension.
Outlawing life extension.
Yeah.
Is that a problem now?
I know it's a slow burn.
You mean like cryogenics? Is that what you're saying?
No, I mean people that are trying to extend their life to be 150 years old or whatever. We shouldn't do that if it's going to stop progress for the people that come after, right?
That's true. If you follow this premise, that would be counteracting principle. Anybody else? So he's really trying to lay out this premise that, you know, when you're thinking about things and there's a new paradigm of thought that's emerging, just understand just how horribly hard it is to really change at a root level how you think about things, and expect that society will have lots and lots of resistance to that new thought. So as Bitcoiners, we're well aware of this, right? Because Bitcoin kind of gets around a whole model of thought around money. And most people don't even know what the money they have is. And, so you got to start by backing up and explaining a lot before you even get to the Bitcoin topic. In chapter 4, called Technology Boom, he starts out with a few examples, which we'll go over here in a little bit. So if he talks about a situation where his folks, when he was young, asked, like, would you rather have $1 million now, or would you rather have a penny and have it double every day for 31 days? So who wants the $1 million? $1 million? Oh, come on. I know you. Okay, we got it. One taker. How much is a penny when doubled 31 days every time the amount doubled? A lot, right? Also, he talks about, well, I'll go through that. So a penny doubled 31 times gives you $10,737,418.24. So as a kid, you can imagine that, oh yeah, I'll take $1 million, right? How much is a penny doubling? Oh, maybe 20, 30 bucks. Might be your first thought. So yeah, this is where the numbers get really hard to fathom, right? Another story it relates is the guy that invented the game board chess, and he was I'm not sure if this is in China or back in some Arabia somewhere, and the king of the time was so impressed by the game of chess, he's like, was offering the inventor, like, what do you want as a reward for making this beautiful game? He said, I'll take a grain of rice as my payment, and but for every square on the chessboard, I want to double it. And there's 64 squares on the chessboard, and a typical grain of rice is 0.029 grams per grain, which is, I believe that's quadrillion, 18 quadrillion. Well, you can see the number. It ends up being 1.2 tons of rice. So the story, as he was telling it, is that once the king kind of figured out that this was getting out of hand, he had the guy executed. So go ahead, Jordan.
I think it's 18 pentillion.
Pentillion? Okay, yeah, wow, yeah, that's crazy. So the third example is a piece of sheet of paper and folding it. If you could fold a sheet of paper 50 times, it's actually impossible given the physical constraints of paper. If you could fold it 50 times, how thick would it be? And yeah, so the answer, as you see here, is 149 million kilometers, which is about roughly this distance between the Earth to the Sun, which is pretty crazy to think. I mean, there's not enough paper, right? So the whole point of this is to illustrate that thinking exponentially for humans is very hard, right? I mean, we think we're doing good if we can think linearly. It's like, okay, number go up, right? Well, people start say, well, okay, Bitcoin's at 100,000, maybe it'll be 140,000 by the end of the year, or 150, or maybe 200. Okay, well, last year it was this, so now it's this, so next year it should be, maybe I'll add 50% just to kind of be optimistic or something. But when you're talking about changes of thought, changes of technology, changes of systems, they don't necessarily grow in a linear fashion. They often will grow exponentially. I mean, what's the time it takes to transmit a message between here and England? It's a fraction of a second. But before, you had to write a letter, put it in an envelope, put a stamp on it, give it to the post guy. He had to go give it to the sorter. I mean, at some point it got on a cruise ship, went across the ocean. So, I mean, that's the kind of differences that we're talking about.
Andrew.
Yeah, sure.
One of the fun examples of this is the SHA-256 algorithm, right? There's 256 bits worth of possibilities every time you hash something. That's more possible hashes than there are atoms in the known universe.
Right. And that's hard to think about. I guess you could say, well, that's the known universe, and maybe what about all the unknown universes? But hey, it's hard to think about, right? The next section subsection is called doubling up, and he's talking, in this case, primarily about Moore's Law. So everybody familiar with Moore's Law? Pretty much, yeah. This is a graph I found. And if you look on the left side, I think it's an exponential legend, or you'd say a logarithmic. And the year starting in 1970 all the way up to about 2020. And these are, I know it's tiny, you can't read it, I don't expect you to, but these are like literally all the processors, all the CPUs that have been invented and kind of where they fit on this graph. And even though that it's a logarithmic on the left side, you can see that it forms pretty much a straight line. So this is really a doubling every year of compute power. And it has pretty much followed that Moore's Law, which is pretty astounding that it's still in effect today. And I've seen the same graph where a few of the quantum things or dots are starting to get placed up here. So that's pretty crazy. So he also talks about how that is similar to this sigmoid function curve of technology. And I couldn't find this in an electronic way, but I had to snap it out of the book here. But if you look at this, it's maybe a little hard to see, but on the left, the legend is performance going up and then cost coming down, and then time to the right on that axis. And this first S-shaped sort of curve is Moore's Law. So what we just looked at on that last graph, which is a straight line, but since this left axis is a linear axis, it becomes more of a S-shape. And then he puts this hypothetical next technology kind of that would supplant it. And in this case, he's saying, oh, this potentially is quantum. So as Moore's technology maybe is petering out, quantum technology will be taking off, right? And then he's got a third one that he started here called the third technology. So anyone want to hazard a guess at what's the next technology that's going to supplant quantum technology?
Bitcoin.
Not Bitcoin, yes?
It gotta be something, I don't.
AI.
No. AI.
We use the quantum computers to simulate our own universes, and then the inhabitants of those universes create their own computers with the materials in those universes.
42, right. Everybody knows.
Isn't it something related with our own body, right? Like,
It might. I mean,
do you have an answer?
I don't have an answer. No, it's an open question. The fact that sitting here while we're probably just barely grasping what quantum really means and entanglement means, and the ability for these things to compute states at immense speeds means, barely understanding that, trying to put our brain into a mode where we are thinking about the next thing that supplants that is really difficult from where we're sitting right now, right? But if history plays itself out, then there will be something that does take over. So when I saw that, it reminded me of this, which is the Gartner hype curve. Is anyone familiar with this one?
Looks kind of like the Dunning-Kruger curve.
Yeah. So this is, and I brought it out because I think it's like important to kind of, in the same context of thinking about things, there's a lot of expectation, there's all sorts of variants of this graph for various technologies. It could be like CD-ROM technology, telephone technology. Of course, the one everyone wants to look at right now is the AI technology one. And where are we? Where are we on this graph? If this is kind of how things go in terms of technological adoption, I'm hearing more and more that we're over the peak of AI expectation. Would people think that, or you think we're still on the upward curve, going up the roller coaster with the ratcheting, looking at the sky? It's all blue sky ahead. It's going to be great. AI is going to do everything for us. General AI is coming around the corner. It's going to keep going. Are we still kind of climbing the expectations, or are we kind of, maybe it's not doesn't do everything that we want or not? Doug?
I'll give you my opinion. I think on the general AI front, maybe we're
potentially a little ahead of what fully general AI in terms of like chatbots and ChatGPT will do. But I think we're way underestimating the impact of real world AI. I think it's coming. It's going to be a much bigger deal, right? And
Yeah.
there we're talking about robots and autonomous vehicles with AI brains and how they're going to change. I think we're really not thinking enough about how that's going to change society.
Right. So for those that probably won't hear him on the recording, so Doug was saying that I think we're kind of maxing out where the chat AI sort of is getting us, and that's what we'll eventually see is more AI used in broader technologies. And this is where kind of the disillusionment happens. Everybody's like, isn't everything we thought it was going to be? But through all this discovery process, we get some really good examples that come out of it. And then the slope of enlightenment, we kind of keep crawling back up to like, okay, now we know what it can really do. Let's put it to work. Let's make some money. Let's build some businesses that are hanging on to it. So he talks a little, there's quite a bit of discussion about self-driving cars. And I'm not going to get into all the details, but he describes from level 0, which is you drive the car, all the way up to level 5, where it drives completely by itself. And he talks about it in the context of what Tesla's done and how it was pretty good. I mean, the car could park itself initially pretty decently, and then it was driving around and on freeways pretty good, and now it's pretty much handling all situations. He talks a little bit about like how now we see the companies built around it. Uber and Lyft are big examples of this. But he asks, are they gonna continue to be able to make a good business model and margin out of it when more and more cars and the cars that are typically owned have more and more capabilities, right? Are smarter and smarter. He also talks about like, because we're in the habit of everybody having a car, then the amount of parking that's necessary is pretty large in terms of actual utilization of the car. Really, 5%, we could only need 5% of the parking that we actually have to build now, just because if nobody had a car and everybody was running around in automatic cars, then that would free up a lot of resources. So it's another way of thinking of where where the optimizations are. He even further talks about how Tesla and Waymo are actually, because their self-driving AI is so good and really the whole thing about car insurance is about you're insuring the person making a mistake driving the car. So if the car's not making a mistake, then why should you have to insure it? Because it's not going to make a mistake. So how does that affect the insurance industry? And he even theorized that, well, really, they should just self-insure. Like, we as a company ensure that our products aren't going to run anybody over. So there's no fault, there's no potential damage. The point of it is to, while you think about the car, and it's cool, and the technology, the fact that it can see the road and objects and react and drive properly is really cool technology. What about these secondary effects? What about these secondary industries, and how are they going to change around the primary technology change? And then I threw this last one up in there because I thought years ago, it's like, wouldn't it be nice to go on a vacation like out west or someplace and have your own car? You don't have to rent a car. You don't have to get a plane ticket. You don't have to like deal with baggage claim. I just want to like pack my car, jump in it, put the seat back, and like say, wake me up when we get there. Or I'll wake up, we have to, take a little biological break or something, and just like, all right, time to get off the freeway. But how many people would like trust the car so that you could like completely fall asleep in it and know that it's not going to like run under a semi or something, or come skidding off the road if it starts snowing or something like that? I mean, do we trust the self-driving stuff that much yet? Probably not quite yet. So, but I mean, if you see the improvements, what's to think we can't get there? I don't know. So, another thing I always dreamed of is like, why is it that my car is limited to like 80 miles an hour? It's like if I'm driving to California, I don't want to take 4 days. I want to take 1 day. Why can't it drive 200 miles an hour? So it's like if, and you know, that's a lot of air drag, but okay, if these cars are so smart, then why can't you like do an ad hoc sort of train of cars such that they're all like drafting on each other and like, you know, and so they all know how to flock swarm and figure out how to come in together. And like when they're on a stretch of highway where you got 10 cars all like bumper to bumper flying down the freeway and you're optimizing the air resistance, then you can get even more efficiency and get there faster. And why not, right?
Drop down to the
Yeah.
highway.
Andrew, I wanted to ask about Moore's Law.
Yeah.
So aren't we, I heard a couple years ago that we were approaching like the upper threshold with regard to like CPU chip size manufacturing?
Yeah, I think most chips, the higher end chips are running at 4 nanometer die size, and that they say when they start getting 3 and sub 3, that you start running into, you know, different physics, electromagnetism, interference. Like we're starting to like deal with the properties of the matter itself, right? I don't know. Steven's got maybe a thought here.
I mean, yeah, I think we've been hitting that for a long time now, just in terms of like, we're getting down to the point where you just, it's not even physically, it's becoming physically harder to fit as much onto the chip, right? We're brushing up against the laws of physics. However, there's also other advances in processor technology that's not just how many transistors. There's like stuff like hyper-threading, multi-threading and stuff like that, and like being able to run more CPU threads in parallel and like adding more cores and things like that. These kinds of optimizations, while they're not the same as doubling the number of transistors on the chip, they have the same
Net effect.
expected outcome of making the chip better, faster, more efficient. So even if Moore's Law does break apart in terms of we're not literally putting more transistors on the chip, I think it sometimes seems as though the intended outcome still holds and that the CPUs keep getting better and better. They're just getting better through other means.
All right, moving on. So there gets into a section on virtual and augmented reality. And I didn't really, I mean, he gets into like how he was able to do, and you got to remember, this book is what, about 10 years old? I think it was first published. Let's see. Checking.
I thought it was 2020.
Working. 2020. Okay, so 5 years. Which, in technology terms, is a lot, right? But he was talking about being able to go to one of these labs where he got to, I think it was Apple Lab, where he could use the virtual reality technology, and now maybe it was Tesla, and he got to do a simulation of traveling to Mars and like running around on Mars and interacting with things. And he said, you know, that alone is another mental leap. It's like when we don't have to physically travel to another place in order to perform something, whether it's a surgery or a mechanical operation, because we can just, you know, operate a robot that's remote or something. Again, it's another leap of technology. It's a way of thinking. It's, you know, hard to conceive what exactly that means in so many ways for us. He also kind of posits in this section, it's like, well, if we can so easily kind of recreate our reality for ourselves, are we in a reality ourselves already? I mean, so he posits it. I mean, this goes back, this premise has been around for ancients, since there's a philosopher that said if you could convince yourself there's some like demonic being that's like intercepting all your senses, then you can prove God. I can't remember which philosopher that was. Kant, is that okay? Kant, yeah. So in a way, the whole idea of a simulation and like the Plato's cave analogy kind of hints at that, right?
Sorry, Descartes.
Descartes, sorry. Okay. So I just had one philosophy course in college, so I didn't. Anyway, that's kind of fun and interesting. He mentions that. And then there's a section on additive manufacturing and 3D printing. And it really does kind of boggle the mind to think about. It's like, well, if we only need something and can create it as needed, then that changes the whole supply chain, inventory, like moving stuff around. how you design stuff. I mean, the materials for doing 3D printing are getting better and better. I've seen like steel composites. I've seen 3D printing with glass. I've seen 3D printing with concrete, whole buildings and houses 3D printed. I mean, it's pretty amazing what's possible these days. And like the cost savings and like transportation logistics of all that material and how much fabrication needs to be done for just to get the material into a place like making bricks or paint or whatever. It's like there's a lot of implications of how this technology can, change. I mean, what is Amazon? I mean, if you can make things. And then I kind of extended this myself a little bit with the whole concept. And this really, if we go back to what's the next technology beyond quantum computing? Well, if we could really control the transfer between matter and energy, then effectively we can transport matter or create matter from other matter or energy. And this really is what Star Trek was talking about in terms of the technology that they had. So in a way, we can, by virtue of like watching old Star Trek, we can kind of see how things did. Now they use a shuttle once in a while, but how much of the time they just beam down? Like they beam down to the planet, they beam back up, they beam to the middle, under the surface of the planet sometimes, and then they beam stuff that's there back up. And whenever they are in the cantina on the ship, they're like rolling up to the little doorway right in the side of the wall. It's like, oh, give me a martini, martini. There's a, ice cream sundae. It's like, if we had that technology, what would that change? No grocery store, no cow. I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to think about. And then the last section is the coming sonic boom. And where he's going here with this is comparing the cycle, and he really kind of brings it back to this whole concept of abundance. And currently today, he lays out the case that we are in a continuous credit expansion system where more money is created and it's to drive more production and more output, more GDP, more money. And it's the whole Keynesian thing. This is where we're kind of cranking and cranking. And is it ever going to end? Is there a natural limit to where this goes? And the reason this works, he posits, is because even though technology is driving the price and the cost of things down, and down, and down, we have this countervailing force of money creation that's inflating things up and up and up. So as long as there's more money production and credit expansion, it'll seem like prices are always going up, even though they should be going down. And effectively, we're just kicking the can down the road. Now, I've been hearing a lot more, and I threw this other part of it in, is stable coins on Lightning, yet one more way to kick the can down the road a little more. And maybe we'd have a few thoughts on that. But I can definitely see that. I mean, currently, I think Tether is the 4th largest consumer of US Treasuries, or purchaser of US Treasuries. So if there's no purchaser of US Treasuries, if they went away and stopped purchasing, what would that do to the dollar? It's something to think about, right? And that, for that matter, any other national state, sovereign currency could be affected by effectively where the traditional monetary rails have a certain cost and latency and lag effect. By putting everything on Lightning, you're going to minimize that to very small costs and very instant payments and potentially sub-cent payments, right? So it's definitely a new kind of level of thinking about the implications here. So he brings it back to the analogy of a sonic boom, of an airplane reaching the sound barrier and pushing through it. And when that happens, suddenly you see the airplane and then the boom hits. It's like it's not how nature is supposed to react. You're used to having it react, where you hear something before it comes to you. And where he's going with this is that this really is changing the rules. It's a paradigm shift. It's a big cognitive shift. It's very difficult. And this is where we're where we're headed. And just to round this out, a quote here at the very end of the chapter: "A simple power of technology is that it allows for an abundance without the same amount of jobs and income." Basically, the abundance should continue and benefit us and force prices down such that we don't have to spend as much time in working, and we don't have to have as much income because of the abundance that technology should be affording it if it wasn't for this pesky monetary inflation thing. So with that, I believe that's it. Any Q&A? Anyone? Bueller? Anyone? All right, yes. We should have coordinated a teaser for next time. So that's all I got. Again, this is me, Andrew. This is how you can get a hold of me. If you need references, I got a few things here. I took this picture the other day. Anyone know where this is?
Costco.
Right.
Yeah.
So why do they put the TVs at the beginning when you first walk into Costco?
Because they're not $20,000 anymore.
That's right. So when you look at an 86-inch ultra high density AI thin Q TV for $899.99, you might not buy it, but you walk by and you go, man, that is a brilliant picture. That's like a pretty decent cost. I remember when I spent $7,000 on a plasma not too very long ago, and it's on the curb, and then you go and pick up a bag of peanuts, and it's like $18. That's not so bad. Throw it in the cart. Side of salmon. Oh, well, it's 19. All right, throw that in there. It's like you really don't check prices that accurately kind of once you've been conditioned from walking through the door. I don't know. It's a little conspiracy theory.
So they're giving you the deflation of the electronics,
Right.
so that you don't notice the inflation
Of everything else.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, so that's okay.
Hey, thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to learn more about anything that we discussed, you can look for links in the show notes. That should be in your podcast player, or you can go to atlbitlab.com/podcast. On a final note, if you found this information useful and you want to help support us, you can always send us a tip in Bitcoin. Your support really helps it so that we can keep bringing you content like this. All right, catch you later.